All right, in this video, we are going to discuss the topic of dividends on maximum cash value life insurance policies and really how the design of a policy can impact the illustrated dividend payout, but then more importantly, the actual dividend payout. If my goal is to maximize the cash value in a life insurance policy, short-term and long-term, and I really want to dig into the numbers and understand how it works, this is meant to do just that. So, last video we covered the modified endowment contract and objections we hear around that. Now we're going to dive into dividend treatment. This will be fun. We're going to have a deep dive, but we're going to try and keep it as clean and smooth as possible. So, an objection we often hear around dividends on the topic of FUD. We have it called FUD tactics. FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I got that from a good friend of mine that we've been working with for a couple of years now, but he exposed me to that topic. Really what it entails is planting fear, uncertainty, and doubt into the minds of potential prospects, clients, in order to sway them away from working with someone else and then just work with me. Hey, don't work with that guy, but work with me. Ever feel like that? So the purpose of this is to get rid of that altogether. So here we go. What we often hear around the topic of dividends is that dividends are more favorable on base premium dollars compared to PUA dollars. A claim we'll often hear on the right is that a high base premium can produce greater long-term cash value performance. That claim, to be clear here, is 100% based on non-guaranteed illustrations and projections, whether they are ran in a higher dividend interest rate environment, a lower dividend interest rate environment. We're going to look at some actual numbers here, illustrations, and then actual policies too. It'll be really interesting to see the real data. So in respect to dividends being more favorable on base premium dollars compared to PUA dollars, that is based off of the following: illustrations and data provided. What we want to look at here, this is very, very important, is actual performance and then my net cash value. So whenever we see a life insurance illustration or have a policy, whatever I am receiving in dividends is important, but at the same time, I don't really care. And the reason why is I want to see what my net or total cash value is and what is the actual growth rate on that, the actual internal rate of return. We're going to break this down further as we progress through everything. So what we're going to look at here are illustrations to really validate how data can validate the point that if I go with a high base premium, it can produce greater long-term value. But then we're going to look at actual policies that have lived the test of time. One was issued in 2007, and we were able to obtain the original projection. The individual paid into that policy every year. He's about to hit his 15th anniversary date, 2021, entering year 15. We get to see the actual policy performance. That was an all base premium policy. We've got the original illustration, and then what actually happened, we pulled the annual statements and tracked it year to year. And then a policy we put in force in 2016 that was designed for maximum cash value, minimum premium, as low as we could go. Again, looking at the illustrated performance and then the actual performance. So before we get into that, I just want to put some information together or explain some information that's very important on this point right here. The idea of dividends being more favorable on base premium dollars compared to PUA dollars. So, when it comes to the topic of dividends, if you have an insurance policy, a whole life insurance policy with a company paying a 6% dividend, for example, what that is made up of is as follows. We have a guaranteed rate, pre-7702 change, a guaranteed rate of 4%. Then the company declared a surplus in earnings of 2%, and the total together comes out to 6% flat. Now, a quick side note, if you're ever looking at a life insurance illustration and you see that column that reads total annual dividend, the dividend column on an illustration reflects the surplus only. And that can be confusing. If I take a company like Mass Mutual, for instance, that has a 6% dividend rate for 2021. When I look at that dividend value column on an illustration, that does not reflect the 6% dividend rate advertised by the company. It only reflects the surplus rate of 2%. And that'd be the same thing with Guardian at a 5.65% dividend and a guarantee of 4%. The dividend column would only reflect the surplus of 1.65%. If that makes sense, I usually like to draw that out as we go, but we've got other video content on that. But quick side note there. So going back to this, the actual dividend treatment on a life insurance policy, guaranteed rate, and then also the surplus rate. When I pay money into a life insurance policy, my money as a policyholder can go toward one of two areas. I can pay it toward the base premium, or I can pay it toward the PUA rider. Now, when I pay money into the base premium component of a life insurance policy, what happens in respect to my cash value in the first year and sometimes the first and second year? Nothing shows up with a traditional policy, almost always in year 1 and sometimes in years 1 and 2. However, as I continue to make premium payments, that premium does come back to cash value, begins to build equity, but nothing shows up right off the bat. And the reason why is the company is going to overcharge me for the death benefit up front, the actual whole life death benefit. Whereas that PUA rider, if I pay $10,000 toward PUAs, I'll see approximately $10,000 show up in cash value immediately. That's money I can access, begins to earn the guaranteed rate, begins to earn dividends. This is the key to accelerating the cash value growth on a life insurance policy. It will buy you some death benefit depending on my age. On average, if I paid in $10,000, I might see another $30,000 come back in cash value. Here's what I want to touch on though. Going back to this, the dividend rate of 6%, common sense would tell me, hey, if I just put more money toward the PUA rider, then I start to earn that 6% dividend or whatever the dividend rate is from the insurance company on my cash value. Remember that the dividend rate is always a gross rate. That's not my actual internal rate of return. But with that said, common sense would tell me, hey, that dividend should be applied just on my entire cash value, which is not the case with a whole life insurance product. Let's break this down. So how it works specifically is if I look at the guaranteed portion of 4%, that is credited in an identical manner to base premium dollars and PUA dollars. The guaranteed floor of 4% functions exactly the same on cash value, regardless if that cash value is generated from base premium dollars or PUA dollars. The surplus rate, however, is different. It is true that there's a 2% surplus applied to everything, but when you actually break down a company's dividend formula, how they apply dividends to a whole life insurance policy, you will find long-term, so let's go this, surplus, long-term is more favorable to base premium dollars. Now, what does that mean, Steve, to be specific? Let's take a look here real quick, and we're going to reference this a couple times. So here's one company's dividend formula based on a new illustration to the left. We see initially, as money is going into a policy, what happens? There's my base premium dividend formula. Here's my PUA dividend formula. This is technical, so we're not going to spend too much time really breaking it down. But what do you notice here as time passes? The dividend formula on base premium dollars becomes more attractive. And this is based off of today, 2021, in a low dividend interest rate environment. So the argument we often hear is, hey, we are very low in terms of dividend rates and just the interest rate environment in general. However, as time passes, dividends have to come up, which means what's more favorable right now long-term, imagine how much better it's going to look long-term if you go with a higher base premium now because dividends are going to come up. So this formula will go up too. That's based on an illustration, projection. Keep that in mind. not reality. So what we want to look at here, and we're going to really break this down in detail, is illustrations are not reality. We always talk about actual performance. 4 major mutual companies, historical performance, copy what big banks, wealthy individuals do. Here's what I want to touch on. It is true that on an illustration, a higher base premium may project stronger long-term cash values. The reality, however, is that minimum premium policies produce stronger cash values. So aside from what a projection displays, short-term or long-term, what we've seen is policies that we design for banks, corporations, wealthy individuals that have been doing it this way forever, minimum premium policies, which result in the company paying out also the minimum commission because the money's going really in the cash value instead when you look at that dollar and where it goes. But minimum premium results in stronger cash values long term. Here's why. The dividends on base premium dollars are extremely sensitive, meaning it may project one thing, but what actually happens is much, much different from that projection. And again, we're going to look at numbers here. A higher base premium often underdelivers on the cash value. So let's get into this. We're going to look at these actual policies, but first we're going to look at an illustration here. And the point is to validate the fact that formula you just saw, that long term, if I go with a higher base premium, I could potentially have more money. Let's take a look at that. So again, there's our formula, but what we're going to look at here is first a 45-year-old male paying in $100,000 per year into a high cash value life insurance policy with one of the major mutual companies, and we have a 1090 designing the policy with the minimum premium as low as we could possibly go, and then also a 3070 with a level term rider attached, but you're going to see a big difference in the dividend treatment. So first we're going to look at 10 years, and then we're going to look at continuously paying the base premium after we drop the term rider. This is really going to shed some light here. So on the left, what do we have? Base premium, $10,000, a 1-year term insurance rider, first year about $1,000. The rest goes into PUAs, about $89K. Here's my net out of pocket the first year, $100,000, and there is your projected dividend in the first year, 0. Cash value, however, is what? $87,500. Okay, looks good. Now as we progress on to the example on the right, same policy, same company, same 45-year-old male ran at a preferred rating, $100,000 going into the policy. 30% of that payment is directed toward the base premium, $30,000. Level term rider of just under $1,400 for 10 years. It's a level 10-year term rider, and we drop it after that point in time. You can see it drop off here. There's my PUA, a little over $68,000, but look at this. Year one, that dividend payout is what? $5,300. On the 1090, my dividend payout was what? 0. So right off the bat, I see a favorable dividend with a higher base premium. Yet when I look at the cash value, what do you notice here? $70,000 on the 3070 and $87,000 on the 1090. We've got this column right here, cash value difference, which represents how much more or less the 1090 design has compared to the same company, same product, but with a higher base premium, the 3070 design. So right off the bat, you've got $16,000 more. The next year, you've got $33,000 more. If I want to focus on the actual performance, year 5, I break even on the 1090. If I look at the 3070, I break even between years 7 and 8. And that break-even point is important. As a business owner, I put a lot of value on opportunity cost. So aside from what the policy looks like long-term, I do want to see it long-term, But having more money up front to me is very valuable because I can use it to invest in my business, real estate, whatever it might be. Maybe your plan is to pay off some debt. Having that opportunity cost, even if I don't need to use it, is valuable there. But here, break-even point is extended. Okay, as time passes, do we see any difference here? 1090 just pulls further and further ahead because we only paid into the policy for 10 years, made them both apples to apples. What I want to touch on here, if you're in the business, this might be a little confusing or you're just wondering what happened. After year 10 on the 3070, we dropped the term and went reduced paid up. With the 1090, we dropped the term and went reduced paid up after year 15. So we had a premium offset, meaning we just allowed the dividends and interest to pay the policy for us during years 11 through 15, and that was really to avoid a MEC at any point in time. Those are things we like to look at conservatively. So, original illustration, funded for 10 years. Going back to the argument, illustration, a high base premium, if we look at the claim, can result in greater long-term performance. So that 3070 could result in more money long-term. 10 years was not the case. Let's look at the same exact policy, but where we pay into it for 40 years, not at $100,000 per year. And I do want to mention one thing. We have not touched on the flexibility at all on this topic thus far. It's another discussion, but having a minimum base premium, whatever that base premium is, that's what I'm committed to, and I can add additional funds at my discretion, depending on the company flexibility, of course, but I'm committed to a $10,000 premium over here, and over here, I'm committed to a $30,000 minimum premium. So interesting when we look at it. Let's take a look here. First 10 years, these two are identical because it's the exact same policy. Through year 10, 100,000 in, 1.147 in the 1090, 1.087 in the 3070, about a $60,000 cash value difference. When I look at the dividends, short-term and long-term, look at this. So right off the bat, 0 on the 1090, year 10, $15,000. If I look at the 3070, I have $60,000 more by policy year 10, but at the same time, I've received a greater dividend every single year. And by year 10, I've got a $20,000 dividend payout on that illustration. So how do I have a greater dividend payout, but $60,000 less in net cash value? The reason why is remember that dividend column, again, only reflects the surplus. The guarantee is not in that dividend column. It is only the surplus, in this case, it'd be about 2%. So after that, after the 10 years with the level term rider, we drop that term, and now we've got a $30,000 base premium, and we'll assume we continue to pay that $30,000 base premium. Over here, we have a $10,000 base premium, and then also add $20,000 per year into PUAs once we drop that term altogether, just like the 10-year example. Here's what I want to touch on. What happens as time passes? When I hit year 37, when this individual is 82 years old, that 3070 starts to produce more value. And what's interesting, if you kick that base premium up higher, it might not be till year 40 or 45, but eventually you will have more value than even the 3070. So based on an illustration or projection, and going back to that dividend formula, when we look at it long term, what can happen, and this dividend formula here is from these same age 45 illustrations. It gets more and more favorable. By year 37, you've got a big gap as far as how the company is treating dividends on base premium dollars and PUAs. The thing is, going back to the purpose of this video and the main objection, illustrations versus reality. I want to look at actual policy performance because this projection could make a case to say, hey, should I go with a 3070 because I'm interested in potentially having more money long term. even though here it's well, the opportunity cost. Going back to it, I still would prefer that and the flexibility. But all things being equal, if this is exactly what I did, which one projects more money long term? Okay, the 30/70. What actually delivers? Because if this made sense, where it would produce more, we would push it and recommend it and sell it because we'd make a ton more money too. 3 times as much as we would with this policy. Why am I resistant to it? Or why do I always want to show the options and look at this guy? Because the number one issue that happens with whole life insurance is people are often sold on an illustration. They think it's going to deliver, and then they get into it and say, why is it performing so poorly? Why is it performing close to what Dave Ramsey said it would do? It's just under-delivering. We have found one thing to be consistent. The higher the base premium, the greater the policy under-delivers in terms of actual cash value. Let's validate this. So we talked about a historical policy. So the illustrations, short pay, 10 years, made sense to go with the minimum premium. If we're funding for something like 40 years, and we say, okay, by about year 40, I can finally have more money with a 30/70 instead of a 10/90, hey, maybe it does make sense. And if dividends go up over time, well, then it could happen even earlier. So yeah, let's go with it. No, I think that's garbage, and here's why. Actual policy performance. 2007 through 2020, and we've got the 2021 in-force illustration as well. I did not put this policy in force, but we did obtain servicing rights several years ago. This was a policy on an age 30 male paying in $24,000 per year, all base premium, but we've got the original illustration. This was difficult to track down, took some time, but I'm very thankful for the individual and company for sending it. The dividends is what I want to look at. Where we mentioned the dividend treatment on base premiums is very, very sensitive. Let's see exactly what that means. Here's what I want to hammer home here. 2007 policy. So we also took that original illustration. It was issued in 2007 when this company's dividend rate was 6.75%. Now it was all base premium, so dividends were not paid during the first and second year on base premium dollars, but there's your $24,000 per year. Total outlay, that tracks the total payments over time. Cash value, we see really the primary overcharge was on year 1, where he paid in $24K and had nothing to show for it, but a death benefit of just about $2 million. Age 30, ultra preferred, top tier health class, healthy guy. He still is a healthy guy. Pays in, okay. Year 15, which is coming up right now for his year 15 payment, $24,000. He's paid this thing consistently every single year. The original illustration, which we pulled these values straight from, projected these values, breaking even just about year 10. Where we always talk about, hey, a traditional whole life insurance policy is a great example of exactly what not to do. If I'm interested in a high cash value policy and I'm sold this is where buyer's remorse comes into play. Like I hear big banks, corporations, wealthy individuals doing it, and I have zero up front when cash value was my goal. Like, no, can't do that stuff. But original projection displayed a break even year 10, just about year 10. Let's focus on this column because based on the original illustration, here's what the annual dividend displayed based off that 6.75% dividend rate. Here's what actually happened. This is fun stuff, actual performance. So actual performance up until 2020, because 2021 is coming up, his anniversary date, but has not happened. 6.75% dividend rate, year 1, 0 in cash value, that happened, death benefit. Year 2, dividend rate with the company came up to 7.25%. Dividends are not paid in the first and second year, so it really doesn't matter. But what's also interesting here is when I look at it, got a couple bucks, about $400 less in the actual performance compared to the illustrated performance, that original illustration compared to reality, even though that dividend rate came up. Year 3, Dividend comes up a little bit more, 7.30%. Cash value, 44,139. Original projection, 44,553. So there's a gap of about 400 bucks. The dividend rate has come up, but when I look at the dividend payout that year, 390 bucks. What was projected? $390, but that projection was based off of a 6.75% rate. When it actually happened, the dividend had come up to about 7.30%. So that increase in dividend did not result in an increased dividend payout. Now, as we keep going here, what do you notice? Next year, dividend comes down to 7%. Dividend payout, 400 bucks. Illustrated 401 that year. But again, that was at a 6.75% rate. If I go down, let's look at year 10. That's what was illustrated. $36.87 in dividends. $940 is what his actual dividend payout was. And these dividends, cash values, and death benefits, where we got them is not from in-force illustrations. We pulled the annual statement for each year to make sure we can make this as accurate as possible. We wanted a real-time projection or performance measurement. What does it actually look like? So if we look at all of those years, what do you notice? What's really interesting here, look at this. 3 years, when that dividend rate came down a little bit, the dividend payout came down. Now, granted, it only came down $1 per year, but my cash value is going up. That should not happen. Over here, it kept on going up. And it's a significant gap at that point. So why is it coming down? It's not because of the dividend drop. I've got plenty of cash value in there. There's over $150,000. Why is the dividend payout coming down? The reason why, specifically, when we go back to base premium dollars and PUA dollars, remember how the company treats that surplus rate? Where on an illustration, it's more favorable on base premium dollars. Yeah, it's more favorable. In reality, though, what happens? Underperforms. Big X. Let's look at this a little bit. So first, let's just do this. If I look at year 14, 2020, it has actually delivered 355,000, or grew to 355,000. He broke even between years 12 and 13. What we've got on the far right here, that 2467, that is the dividend payout that the in-force illustration projected, and this 2038 is what actually was received when we received the actual annual statement. Same thing. When we look over here, well, I shouldn't say same thing, but when we look over here, it projected to grow to 392, it's at 355. Now next year we've got this projection. I put a question mark on the dividend because every year it's less than what was stated. There's the projected amount. It's never jumped that much ever. Like it's not going to happen when you really look at it as far as what's happening with this policy. So again, why? Base premium and that surplus rate. Let's go back to the formula here. So this was the one that made it look more favorable with the new illustration. Stay with me here. Here's in-force policy data. This is from a different policy, but it hammers home the point. It originally projected strong values long-term on the base premium. In reality, though, policy year 6 for the policy we're about to look at, what happened? The dividend treatment on base premium dollars came down, and instead of catching up year 17, like the new illustration, it's year 32. We found when we squeeze that premium down, the cash values are stronger, but the component that the insurance company can adjust on us, how they pay a surplus rate to our base premium dollars, or the base premium portion of a policy, the lower that is, the less they can mess with it. Think of it that way. So again, let's close out the 2007 policy. Which one, did it make sense? Did it deliver? And by the way, in case you're wondering, like, hey, this has to be from some small company or something like that. This is from one of the 4 major mutual companies that I use personally, and can attest to the fact when you properly design policies, you see stronger value short-term and long-term, guaranteed and non-guaranteed. That's where the design is so critical. Let's look at a good one now. So here's a policy we put in force 2016. This was actually shortly after I got married. But here's the original illustration. The dividend rate, I don't need to write it out, it's right here, was 7.10% at that time, and that's what this projection is based on. Numbers looked fantastic looking back at it today compared to where the dividend rate is today. But at the same time, we see $150,000 per year going in. The base premium was right about 10%, including the term rider. So the true base premium was a little bit less than 10%, but with the term rider it was about $15,000. So original plan was to pay in $150,000 for 3 years, then $125,000 for another 3, and then $50,000 through year 10 for a total of a little over $1 million. Breaking even per that projection, years 3 and 4. We juiced it. Maximum cash value. That death benefit, by the way, was based on a $150,000 MEC limit. We wanted the minimum death benefit possible, minimum premium possible, and then fund right up to that MEC limit, that taxable line on a life insurance policy. So there we go. Now that dividend rate was 7%, 7.1%, but always we want to recall that the dividend rate is always a gross rate that is credited after the company's insurance expenses, after their mortality charges. I want to see the net internal rate of return, what's the actual growth over time, and the annual IRR column here displays just that to the left. Let's put it in blue. Negative the first 2 years, there it is over time. Based on that 7.1% dividend rate, it tops out at about 6.2% on the actual internal rate of return. Okay, now let's look at what actually happened. This will be fun. Actual performance. Here's my dividend rate. Each year, what actually happened with the adjustment. So 7.1, then 6.7, 6.4 for 2 years, 6.2, and then moving forward, just at 6%. So again, pulling the data from the actual company, from everything we had, because we put this policy in force. This one took me less than an hour to put together. This one took me, or the last one, that 2007 policy, took me a day and a half to put together, but it was fun getting all the data. So here we go. Payment structure, or what he actually paid, differed from the original illustration. So it really becomes somewhat invalid after year 3. And the reason I say that is he planned on paying $125,000, that was that original illustration, but he paid in $150,000. So he paid in another $25,000 in year 4, which starts to skew the numbers. It's not a clean apples to apples comparison, but what is consistent is the fact that he max funded it for the first 2 years, which is the most important, but really for the first 4 years. Look at this. Dividend came down. Look at his break-even point. Years 3 and 4. That was not extended, unlike the other policy. Look at the dividend payout here. 39, 83. Next year, or year 3, 74.97 compared to 64.71. That is less. The dividend came down 50 basis points by that point in time. And look at the consistency here. The IRR is how much less? About 50 basis points. Neat correlation, right? So as time passes, year 6 compared to year 6, that's where we're in right now. That dividend payout was $18,000 and change. Where this starts to get unfair though, is he's paid in $825 at this point in time. Whereas the actual policy, he's kicked his payments down. So he's paid in $685. Dividend payout, $11.6. The point here is as we look at this policy, the dividend rate has come down. That's happened across the board in the insurance industry. Insurance companies have had to do that in the low interest rate environment. But what is so interesting is this is still performing. And when we look at policies with higher base premium splits, whether it's 100% like the last example, or if it's a 30-70, a 50-50, we've got a lot of policies on hand between that 30% and 60% base premium range. We see that same story where they tend to under-deliver. They're just not panning out. And that's where people get upset. And that's the last thing we want with anyone that works with us. So again, looking at actual data is what we've got to do here. Cash value continues to grow. IRR tops out, the annualized IRR tops out at a little under 5.1%, whereas based on the 7.1% dividend, it was 6.2. Dividends, 110 basis points less on the projection. But we do see strong performance over time with a properly designed policy. This guy's still satisfied. Loves his policy, has heavily used it for loans, real estate opportunities because his money's there. Really was just shifting money that otherwise would have been in a bank account doing next to nothing, not even in 2016, into a high cash value life insurance policy. And he's got it there accessible all the way through too. Whereas the other individual, granted we did not put that policy in force, the one who took it out in 2007, he's thinking about lapsing it. Now it's finally starting to grow, so I mean, at the same time, I'd say, hey, you might want to hang on here. It does make sense when we look at the performance. We can do some policy changes to make adjustments and improve it, maybe in your best interest. But he's kind of in that position like, hey, I was sold on this great plan. It was going to pan out, and it didn't. To prevent that, that's where that policy design comes into play. If it's designed properly with a low base premium, that's where we've seen buyer's remorse non-existent as opposed to the opposite end of the spectrum. So to kind of wrap this up, because I know this is a deep topic, claim higher base premium can produce greater long-term performance. Again, that is based on non-guaranteed illustrations. Actual performance, what I want to look at here, indicates that minimum premium policies result in maximum cash value. And I talk about this all the time in other videos we put together, is when you look at how corporations, wealthy individuals, big banks utilize cash value life insurance policies. When cash value is their goal, that's what they're interested in. The death benefit has a benefit long term. Cash is their focus. They're cash rich from the get-go. They're looking at the guarantees, cash rich all the way through. That is their objective. Same thing here. So on that same point, if we look at a BOLI or COLI, minimum premium, minimum compensation, maximum cash value. If you look at a private placement deal, which is a different animal in itself, it's a variable universal life, similar to BOLI and COLI, but same thing, minimum compensation, minimum premium, maximum cash value. What the wealthy do with whole life insurance policies comes down to policy design and company selection. That's why I always like to mention these guys, though there are other good companies out there too. And to sum it all up, this is kind of how I feel with all this stuff. We've got this guy, when it comes to whole life insurance, or any kind of cash value life insurance, there's two sides of everything. And this topic of dividends plays right into it. You've got Dave Ramsey on one side saying whole life is horrible, run away from it. And then you hear of big banks, corporations, wealthy individuals parking boatloads of money into cash value life insurance. And you say, okay, why? What's the difference? Well, it all comes down to policy design. And then this topic of dividends, when we look at this, is often used to say, hey, you may want to go with a policy that gives you less up front, which is exactly what makes it easy for these guys to beat up, because when he beats up whole life insurance policies, the policies that he beats up, frankly, he's got a good point. When you really look at it, the individual purchased a policy for cash value. They had no cash value in the beginning, so they forgot why they did it, and he's looking at it saying, hey, like, it's not doing anything. You're going to get your money back in 10 to 15 years. You can do other things with your money. It's horrible. Don't do it. And the person says, yeah, like, I can't do anything with my money. It's a battle that the agent has to fight very, very hard with him and other anti-whole life insurance individuals, compared to a policy that these guys put in place, banks, corporations, or wealthy individuals. Different story. Like, you can't come in and tell them, hey, that's horrible. You don't have any cash value there. It's going to take forever to accrue. It's like, dude, we pay money in, our cash value's there. It's an asset on our balance sheet. Wealthy individuals see the cash value there right away. Like, they don't fall for the whole argument to say go with less up front for a potential non-guaranteed dividend to give you more money long term. It doesn't happen like that. And how they set up policies, anyone can. Really, it all comes down to policy design. Know that that was a mouthful. I had a ton of fun with it. I hope you did as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out anytime. And as always, I hope this helps. Hey guys, Steve Parisi here. If you enjoyed the content you just saw, please subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell for future videos. If you'd like more information or to see some custom policies for yourself, feel free to call or email our offices at the contact information below.